While at BT, you also had, I guess at this point, he's a friend of yours, a good friend of yours, Mr. Bill Clinton on your show.
Yeah.
By that point, are you calling Bill direct? Are you able to pick up the back line and say, yo, Bill, I need you to come on down to BET. I got my shit.
No, we were friends, and I had access to him, and he certainly had access to me. I never abused that access. But I'm also not naive about this. After the Monica Lewinsky scandal, which, as you know, rocked his presidency, he was impeached over that, never removed from office, but he was, in fact, impeached over it. After that scandal, he didn't do an interview for 8 months, 8 or 9 months. He did not do a sit-down interview. He did press conferences because you have to as president to talk about various issues, but he did not sit down for 8 or 9 months for, a one-on-one interview. Just prior to the midterm elections that year, and we're facing midterms now, a few months down the road here in 2022, just prior to the midterm elections, I think the president knew he was in some trouble, obviously, around this Monica Lewinsky scandal, and he needed to sit with somebody and finally have a one-on-one interview. And the phone call came, and they said, the president wants to talk to you. And it's an exclusive. He's not doing any other sit-downs, but you're going to get the first sit-down interview with the president since this stuff all broke. And so 8 or 9 months later, president calls me, and we agreed to do the conversation. We packed up our equipment, went to the White House, and there it was, this huge exclusive. The whole country was waiting to see the president finally sit for a one-on-one conversation to answer these questions. I got the phone call, I did the conversation, and that's what really, I'd been on BT, of course, for a while already, but the nation, not just black people, the nation got to see who this guy Tavis was when I did a one-on-one with Bill Clinton at the height of this Monica Lewinsky scandal. And that's what started me on the trajectory to really expanding my base in my career beyond just black folk on Tom Joyner or black people on BET. That's how my career just kind of opened up.
So you weren't the first black outlet that he did. You were the first.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. First one.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Was it during that interview? Because I know during one of the interviews, you quoted Toni Morrison and said that, as she said, you know, many people think of him as the first black president. Was it during that interview?
I think that was a later interview. He took me to Africa with him. He did a 6-nation African tour during his presidency. And I was invited on that trip with the president. So we went to 6 countries again in Africa on that trip. And in Cape Town, I was going to say Johannesburg or Cape Town. Cape Town. In Cape Town, I sat with him and did a live interview back to the States from Cape Town, South Africa. And I think it was the Cape Town interview where I mentioned that to him. And of course, he got a good chuckle out of it. But it was in Cape Town, I think, where that came up.
So he was open to the idea, like, yeah, I guess you're right.
Yeah, no, he loved it. I mean, trust me. I tell people to this day, and this is true, I love the Black national anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing. But I would give you $1 million right now if you could find any Negro in America who could sing that song start to finish and knows all the verses. I didn't say the chorus, Negro, the verses. Can you sing every one of the verses and not mess up a single word? Bill Clinton is the only person I know who literally knows every verse to lift every voice and sing. And of course, we all know the chorus. But he loves black people. He grew up around black people. He was educated with black people. And that's why black people, you know, for the most part, have always loved Bill Clinton. And that doesn't mean, to be very clear, it doesn't mean he's been right on all the issues. Because President Clinton and I have had many disagreements and conversations. I wouldn't call them arguments, but disagreements over the years about certain policies. I didn't like his welfare policy. I didn't like his crime bill. There were a number of things he did that I did not like. And he was always open to let me say that to him. We had conversations about it. So he's very open in that way to hearing that kind of critique. So he's not right about everything. At the same time, though, he does have a particular and a peculiar love for black people. But again, you show me somebody black who knows every verse to lift every voice and sing, I'd be really impressed. But Bill Clinton does, and he can sing it. He can sing it, man.
Oh, man. You're hosting BET Tonight until something like 2001, correct?
Yeah, something like that. 2001. Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah.
And right around that same time, Viacom, it buys BET for a reported $3 billion. BET is no longer a black-owned company, if you will.
That's correct.
What were some of the changes that you saw in-house at the company? Did the culture of the company change now that it's owned by different management?
It didn't change very much because even though they bought BET, Viacom did, from Bob Johnson, Bob stayed on as chairman and CEO of the company. So Bob was still there running it. So there wasn't a real change, not for as long as I was there. I wasn't there very much longer. I eventually got fired by BET. Bob Johnson fired me because after Viacom bought it, I got this huge exclusive interview with a woman named Sarah Jane Olsen. She'd been on the lam for 40 years, I think, had been running from the cops or hiding out from the cops. She'd been involved in some stuff years ago where a cop was killed, and she wasn't involved in pulling the trigger or anything like that, but she was involved in this as part of the Symbionese Liberation Army, the SLA, the Symbionese Liberation Army. She was a part of this, and she had changed her life. She changed her name. She got married, moved to another state, had a family, was very involved in her community, had completely turned her life around for 30 plus years later. One day, driving through Minneapolis, St. Paul, where she lived, she got pulled over for a broken traffic light. And thankfully for her, unlike too many brothers, she didn't end up dead over a stupid traffic violation. But they did run her plates and took her driver's license. And lo and behold, they discovered this woman had been on the FBI's most wanted list for 30 years. And as fate would have it, don't ask me how, but I ended up being the person who she wanted to give the interview to before this thing went to trial. Or before this whole thing was going to come to a head. So I sat down, did the interview with Sarah Jane Olsen. And when I got the interview done, it wasn't the kind of thing that really belonged on BET, but I offered it to CBS, which Viacom also owned. CBS turned it down. I offered it to ABC. ABC accepted it. It ran in prime time on ABC. It killed everything that night in the ratings, including what was on CBS. And the white folk at CBS the next morning woke up and said, how did we get beat so bad in the ratings last night? They said some guy named Tavis Smiley had an exclusive interview that ran on ABC last night. And that's what we got beat by. And somebody said, don't that Negro work for us?
Exactly.
Doesn't he work at BET? Don't we own BET? And they said, yeah, the Negro does work for us. And so Bob Johnson got a phone call asking him, why was this Negro on your plantation on ABC last night beating us in the ratings? And I told Bob Johnson, I said, Bob, I offered the interview to CBS, our sister company in the Viacom family. CBS turned it down. Once they turned it down, I own it. I can sell it to anybody I want to sell it to. I sold it to ABC. Don't be mad at me. CBS turned it down. Well, that's the truth of what happened. But I think Bob got squeezed by the Viacom people. Somebody had to pay for this Negro escaping the plantation and going to the competition and beating them in the ratings. And so I got fired by BET. So the answer to your question is that I don't know how the culture changed thereafter because I wasn't there very much longer after I did that interview.
Okay. And I love these stories. And again, I know so many people are going to find this conversation between us so inspirational because it hasn't been all gravy.
No.
You know, you've been fired. Mm-hmm. It's been all kind of things going on in your career, and to see that resilience, persistence is always going to overcome resistance. And I'm so happy you're being so candid about these trials and tribulations you're going through, but ultimately you keep moving forward.
No, I love that line. Persistence always overcomes resistance. I like that.
Yes, it does.
Persistence overcomes. I'm gonna steal that, Brother Sean. I'm gonna steal that one, man. But you're right. I've learned that in my career. You got to be persistent. As my friend Sonia Sanchez, the great writer and poet, says, you have to resist. You have to resist these things in your life. So yeah, I've had a lot of ups and downs, and there have been moments in my career where I've been left dead. They thought they left me by the side of the road for dead. And I've been fortunate every time after being fired by BET or Black folk falling out with me during the Obama era or the PBS drama. I've had all kinds of drama in my life, but I am fortunate that I've always followed my North Star My faith, my family, and my friends, my true friends, have always stood with me. And like any career, it's been a roller coaster, but I am grateful. I am grateful and I am humbled to still be in the game all these years later.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you leave BET and you go back to radio. You do National Public Radio, NPR. Do that for a little while. It doesn't seem like too much happened over there. Why'd you eventually leave? Because you wasn't there that long.
Yeah, I was there for 3 or 4 years, not very long. 3 years, I think. And I left ultimately because I was the first African-American in the history of NPR to have his own daily show. So I as the saying goes, he who breaks through the brush first gets the thorns. He who breaks through the brush first gets the thorns. And I've done that a number of times in my career. And at NPR, I was honored to be there. I mean, NPR is a great network. They provide a wonderful service to this country, National Public Radio. But I was the first African-American through the door. And I was really pressing for them to bring other African-Americans in as talent. And when I was there were no black folk on the board of NPR. I was the primary African-American talent. And I didn't like being essentially the spook who sat by the door. I didn't like the idea that because you have me here, that now gives you an excuse to think you shouldn't hire any other black folk. I didn't like that. And so after complaining about that for 2 or 3 years and they weren't moving fast enough for me, I just left. I enjoyed the time I had at NPR. And again, I'm now being heard by millions of white folk every day, not just black people. And I'm still on Tom Joyner. So I'm still on Tom Joyner. I'm gone from BET, but I'm talking to millions of black folk every morning on Tom Joyner, talking to millions of white folk every day on NPR. I'm in the catbird seat, but I didn't like the way they were maltreating and disrespecting black people. I didn't want to be the spook who sat by the door. So after 3 years, I just left.
Wow. From there, you go on over to PBS, if I get this correct.
Yep.
Public Broadcasting Station. I should have asked you this earlier. I'm just curious. You've been on television as a medium. You've been on radio for many years. Which one do you prefer?
It's a good question. Neither. I like them both. At this point, I'm dedicated and committed to radio because the station that I own and we're running right now, I want to make that work. I want to build a black talk radio network beyond the station that we're flagshipping in LA right now, KBLA Talk 1580. But I love the intimacy of radio. And I love, the penetrating nature of television, being able to look in somebody's eyes and see whether or not they're telling you the truth, whether they're lying, or to receive them for who they are in real time. And again, you can look in their faces. I like the intimacy of that medium as well as I love the intimacy of radio. They're two different mediums, but I love both. And at one point, I was doing both NPR and PBS. So not only am I the first African-American, first person of color, period, to have his own show every day on NPR, I'm also the first person of color, black person, to have his own show every day on PBS. And so at one point, I was on NPR and PBS at the same time. And still doing Tom Joyner. So I was on Tom Joyner. I'm on NPR. I'm on PBS. I was working like a Jamaican man with all these jobs. So I was doing all this. But public television and public radio, NPR and PBS, are funded by taxpayer money. In my view, very simply, Brother Sean, is this. If Negroes are paying for it, they ought to see themselves represented in it and on it. And so if our tax dollars are supporting public radio and supporting public television, then somebody black ought to be there. And I'm just humbled and honored that I had the chance to do that first for our people on NPR and then later on PBS.